What if the first space shuttle to ever reach space was also one of NASA's most important and mysterious spacecraft? This is the incredible story of Space Shuttle Columbia, the vehicle that opened a new chapter in human spaceflight. Before we begin, welcome to Stella Science. If you enjoy amazing stories about space, science, and the universe, like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. And tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? And who is your favorite astronaut? Now, let's go back to April 12, 1981, and discover the incredible journey of Space Shuttle Columbia. The story of Columbia begins with an ambitious idea. NASA wanted to create a spacecraft that could launch like a rocket, travel into orbit, return through Earth's atmosphere, and land on a runway. After years of development and testing, that vision became real with Space Shuttle Columbia. Columbia was officially designated OV-102. It was named after the Columbia Rediviva, a famous American exploration vessel, and the name also carried a long connection with exploration and discovery. Columbia was different from Enterprise. Enterprise was built mainly for atmospheric testing and never went into space, while Columbia was designed to become a fully operational orbital spacecraft. Building Columbia was an enormous engineering challenge. The shuttle needed to survive powerful launch forces, operate in the harsh environment of space, and withstand extreme temperatures during atmospheric re-entry. The spacecraft had three major functions. It could carry astronauts, transport equipment and payloads, and return to Earth as a gliding aircraft. Columbia's first launch was unlike any previous human spaceflight mission. NASA planned to send the shuttle directly into orbit without first flying an unmanned orbital test mission. On April 12, 1981, Columbia stood on Launch Pad 39A, Kennedy Space Center. Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen were preparing to make history. The countdown reached zero. Columbia's main engines ignited, followed by the solid rocket boosters, and the enormous spacecraft began climbing away from Earth. The launch marked the beginning of the Space Shuttle era. For the first time, a winged crewed spacecraft had been launched into orbit and was intended to return to Earth for another flight. The mission was called STS-1. It was a test flight, but it was also an enormous demonstration of NASA's confidence in the shuttle design. Columbia reached orbit successfully. Once in space, the astronauts performed tests to evaluate the spacecraft's systems and make sure everything was functioning as expected, but the mission was far from over. NASA still had to prove that Columbia could safely return from space and land on a runway. After completing its orbital mission, Columbia began its journey back toward Earth. The spacecraft entered the atmosphere at tremendous speed, relying on its thermal protection system to survive the intense heat. Thousands of heat-resistant tiles protected the orbiter. These tiles were critical because the spacecraft's underside experienced extremely high temperatures during re-entry. Columbia survived the journey through the atmosphere. As it descended, the spacecraft transformed from a space vehicle into a high-speed glider. The final approach was extremely demanding. Columbia had no normal jet engines to help it perform a go-around, so the astronauts had to carefully control their flight path. On April 14, 1981, Columbia landed safely at Edwards Air Force Base. The first space shuttle mission had successfully completed its historic journey. The achievement changed the future of human spaceflight. NASA had demonstrated that a spacecraft could launch into orbit, carry astronauts, return to Earth, and land like an aircraft. Columbia then began a long career of missions. It carried astronauts into orbit, conducted scientific experiments, deployed payloads, and helped expand humanity's understanding of space. One of Columbia's important missions involved scientific research. The shuttle carried laboratories and equipment that allowed astronauts to conduct Experiments in microgravity. Columbia also carried the Spacelab laboratory. This allowed scientists to perform a wide range of experiments in space without requiring a permanent space station. Over the years, Columbia completed numerous missions. Each mission added to NASA's experience with reusable spacecraft and human operations in orbit. But the Space Shuttle program was never without danger. The loss of Challenger in 1986 reminded NASA and the world that human spaceflight carried enormous risks. Columbia eventually returned to flight after the Challenger disaster. NASA continued improving shuttle operations while learning from previous experiences. Columbia became one of NASA's most experienced spacecraft. It accumulated thousands of hours of flight and carried many astronauts during its operational career. Then, in 2003, Columbia began its final mission. STS-107 was dedicated primarily to scientific research, with the crew conducting experiments while orbiting Earth. During the launch of STS-107, a piece of insulating foam struck Columbia's wing. The damage was not fully understood at the time, but it would later become critically important during re-entry. On February 1, 2003, Columbia began returning to Earth. As the spacecraft entered the atmosphere, hot gases reached the damaged area of the wing. The damage led to the loss of the spacecraft. Columbia broke apart during re-entry over the southern United States, and all 7 astronauts aboard were lost. Columbia's story ended in tragedy, but its legacy continues. From its historic first launch in 1981 to its final mission in 2003, Columbia changed spaceflight forever and became a symbol of exploration, engineering, courage, and the risks humans accept when reaching beyond Earth.